all for being here. Sorry to cut everyone's conversations. So welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here and for just your interest in plant-based eating. So my name is Tony Quintana. I'm the plant-based eating program manager for Animal Protection out of New Mexico. Our program is working just to increase plant-based eating across the state and hopefully make it a little bit easier and more accessible for people. So some of our programs that we're working on is what you're here today, doing cooking demonstrations, nutrition classes, and different kinds of outreach and stuff like that. We're also working with local dining establishments like restaurants, cafeterias, and anywhere people eat to try and get more plant-based options on the menu. And so those are kind of some of our main initiatives, so we're excited today that you're all here. I want to just introduce our two main presenters and then I'm going to get out of the way. So doing the cooking demonstration, we have Faith Suzio. She's a nurse by day, she's an RN. By night, she's
cook by night.
She's a cook by night. She's been doing cooking demos for about 3 years now. So she's, super great and we're excited to have her. And then we have our dietitian here, Gabriel Gaarden, who's going to be kind of talking about nutrition and answering all of your questions. I know I'd be shocked if you didn't have a burning question that you always wanted to ask a dietitian. You'll have your chance after the cooking demo. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over and thank you, Faith.
Yeah. Thank you guys for all coming tonight, and hopefully you enjoy this recipe. It's a really versatile recipe. It's kind of how I like to do my recipes, because anything that's too strict doesn't work for me. I need lots of movement with my recipes. So this particular recipe started off as spring rolls for me, and now it has morphed into salads and bowls of all sorts, and I put this sauce on everything, and so hopefully you enjoy it just as much. I do want a quick start, and this isn't on your recipe sheets. I wanted to show people what tempeh might look like if you're interested in trying something new, because I'm going to throw this in the recipe, or at least on the plates of people who want to try it. So it's a fermented soybean, and it's got tons of protein, it's low fat, a lot of fiber. In fact, one serving of this is 20 grams of protein. So it's basically a less processed tofu. So I'm going to pull it out and cut it real quick, but I just cut it into thin slices here. And I'm going to go ahead and steam it, because it can kind of have a little bit of a bitter flavor if you don't steam it. So I'm going to steam it, and I have a marinade I made. So then I'm going to throw it in the marinade after. And also, if at any time I'm cooking, feel free to ask questions, super casual. You don't have to raise hands even. How many people here have never tried tempeh? Cool, awesome, oh, exciting. This particular one I got from Trader Joe's. It's an organic tempeh, and it's I think $1.99 or something. It's pretty cheap. So. I've already got some water steaming over here, so I'm going to go ahead and throw it in the steamer. So we'll let that steam for a few minutes while we go on to the recipe you have in your hands. So we're going to start by making a sauce here for some summer rolls. And summer rolls this is such a good time of year for it, because who wants anything hot in the kitchen? And you can do any vegetables you want. I pre-prepared some vegetables. We have cucumbers, red cabbage, carrots. We have sunflower sprouts, some cilantro, spring onion, peppers, and jicama. So just a really nice variety of vegetables. You can't go wrong with whatever vegetables you want. So we're going to start with the peanut butter. And I'm going to double this recipe just so that you know, because I'm going to go with a full cup instead of a half a cup of peanut butter. And this recipe, you can whisk it, which I'm going to go ahead and whisk it here today so I don't have to turn on the loud Vitamix. But at home, a lot of times I'll just kind of Vitamix the ingredients up. It doesn't really matter. It kind of could be to your preference if you like chunks of garlic and ginger in your sauce, or if you'd rather just have it creamy, completely and blended. You can go either way.
You ever use almond butter instead of peanut butter?
So, I did experiment with almond butter at home, and you get a different result, but it's still good. Because I know a lot of people are avoiding peanuts or might have a peanut allergy, so you can definitely substitute almond butter. Yeah. All right. And next, soy sauce. So I prefer prefer to use Bragg's over soy sauce. Is this new to anyone? Bragg's amino acids. It's a gluten-free version of soy sauce. The dietitian could probably speak more to it than I can, but it's a good alternative. I use it as a salad dressing as well, and a lot of different dressings I use. So it's very similar tasting to soy sauce, though. Let's see. And so it calls for 2 to 3 teaspoons.
What's the base of that?
Soy.
It's soy.
Vegetable protein from non-GMO soybean and purified water. That's the ingredients. Alright. And remember, I'm doubling here, so. And in fact, if anyone wants to look, I will kind of put this up here. You can kind of grab it and look at it. The peanut butter I used today is, you can use crunchy, creamy, whatever you want. Let's see. So I'm going to do some limes here. I'm going to squeeze some limes in. Originally, when I've done this recipe, I've used rice vinegar. So you can substitute with rice vinegar, and it's equally delicious. I kind of just decided I wanted to go with a little fresher, and lime this time of year is so awesome. So. Someone taught me a neat trick with a lime one time. If you don't have a lime juicer, you could take a spoon and kind of take the backside of the spoon. I'm probably make a huge mess. But you can kind of squeeze it in there, and I actually find that you actually often get more juice doing it this way. So just a little something. And I probably won't do it beyond just showing at this point because I don't want to waste everyone's time. But a lot of times then I'll take like my already squeezed limes and double them up and like, get every last little juice bit out of it because I hate wasting. So. Actually, you can also save these and make a nice cleaner with them. Have you ever saved them? I'm trying to remember. It's been a while. I think I just put it with some, I don't remember. I shouldn't tell you that. I've used them as a clean. You can DIY. You can look online and. All right. And some maple syrup. You can certainly substitute like brown. A good option would be brown sugar. It has like that caramel taste to it. You could do that, or you can use agave, or if you don't want anything sweetened, that you certainly don't have to. I don't find that you need to omit it because it doesn't overpower it. So if you're afraid of that, you can like maybe half it, or you can omit it. So let's see. I'm gonna do. All right. And then I've got some water here already. The first time you make this, if it's not going to sit in the fridge, it will be a little thinner, but if it goes in the fridge, it thickens. So, and then by the magic of TV, I have pre-chopped garlic and ginger. And that is it. Now we're just going to whisk it all together. Another little tidbit is that this starts as a great base, and you can add on to it if you want to. Like you can add jalapeno to it, or I often will add sriracha sauce to it for a little extra heat. Even a little bit of like toasted sesame seed oil will go a long way, just like like maybe for this whole recipe, like a teaspoon. So the little ways that you can kind of flare it up, but like it's a good base to start with. And the other really nice thing about this is I usually when I make this will at least double it so I can put a jar in the freezer to have. And then you can have a jar in the freezer and then it's pretty quick to defrost. So
How long does it last in the fridge?
like about 4 or 5 days. I mean, I've had it longer than that and it's not gone bad, but you know, like to be safe.
Yeah.
How long does the tempeh steam?
I'm gonna steam it for about 15 minutes with my exact watch. Anyone who's been to the demos before knows that I'm like not a huge measurer. It's kind of a miracle. I even have measuring cups up here right now. And that goes for my timing of things as well. All right, so then we have a nice creamy sauce here. And as I said, it's a little more liquid because it's at room temperature. And a lot of this stuff is more liquid at room temperature versus fridge. So. All right, so that's the sauce. We've already got our veggies by the magic of TV again, already cooked. So, has anyone rolled spring rolls, summer rolls, whatever you might want to call it? So you can find this in like the ethnic or Asian aisle, most of the grocery stores. I've gotten them at Albertsons and Sprouts, and you don't have to like go look for a specialty store. You should be able to get these at any of the grocery stores. And all it is, these are rice papers. Ingredients, rice flour and tapioca flour, water, and salt. So really simple ingredients. So over here, I just have a pan of water, that's all it is. Nothing special. I'm like, let me move this out of the way now so you can see. So I pre-warmed the water just a bit. You don't need it too warm. And you let your paper soak. And of course, the warmer the water is, the quicker it's gonna loosen up. And if you let it go too long, it can tear the paper kind of easy. But if you don't do it long enough, it doesn't really stick very well. So we're kind of getting there. You can see it's kind of loosening up. Tony asked me, or maybe it was Gabriel, and he's like, you do this with people? And I'm like, I like invite a whole party over and I'll make everyone roll their own. Like, I'm not rolling for people. They get to roll their own, and it's fun because everyone can make their own. And it's just kind of, the first time I did it was at someone's house party, and it was a lot of fun. So then you can kind of see it's wiggly. That's about what you want. It doesn't have to be perfect. And you try to shake off the excess water. Get a nice clean, dry plate. Kind of lay it out there. So rolling it is kind of like rolling a burrito. And I think the lesson I learned the first time I roll is like, you want to put everything, and you want to put a lot of everything, and less is more in this case. Because like, if you overfill it, it like will tear up and whatever, it'll taste good, but. So I'm just gonna put like a slice of one of everything. Another good idea in here is like avocado slices are super yummy. Right. And then you are going to roll it like a burrito. So the side, you're going to basically fill one side of the roll. You're not going to go in the middle because otherwise it's a lot harder to roll. So you're like kind of in the back side, whether you want to do it on the either side that's closest or farthest from you. But you're filling on one side of the paper, and then you start to kind of roll it together. And just like a burrito, so you start the roll. I'm not sure how well you guys can see. And then you fold in the sides. And you continue to roll it.
Boom.
Magic. So there is alternative ways to do this too. So you have your peanut sauce, and you could just dip, and a regular fill in a bowl, and you could dip. Another way is, we'll roll another one. Another option is you could put the sauce directly into the roll. And that's a little cleaner. So, are you type A? Are you? I really find that at home, what I do a lot is I'll make this sauce, and I won't have the time to roll, or like even rolling these, you know, they're only gonna last maybe a day. Like, they're not something that's gonna stay fresh very long because the rice paper will dry out. And so what I'll often do is take a bed of lettuce or spinach, I'll throw my vegetables on, and then I'll pour the sauce right on it and just like make it into big old spring roll salad. Another thing I found at home is that sometimes I have things in my cupboard from like 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 years ago, and I had some rice papers from a long time ago, and I tried to use them, and they were like breaking and falling apart, and I think it's just because over time they're just not as good. So you might want to, like, if they go on sale, maybe don't stock up on a whole bunch unless you're going to use them within the year. And they are actually really cheap. Like, you can usually get a package of rice paper rolls for like $2 or $3. So in this case, I'm gonna go ahead and just put a scoop of sauce in it. It's a little cleaner. And same technique, you're gonna have filled that on one side. We need to invest in a mirror so people can like see. And I know it's so hard, like one thing of everything versus like piling in, but it tends to fall apart that way. So, ta-da, another one. So today I thought instead of rolling 30, 30 rolls, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to toss it in a bowl with some rice noodles. So instead of rice paper, I'm going to do rice noodles, and we're going to serve everyone with a plate of that. So same exact ingredients, except for instead of paper, we're going to use the noodles. Real quick, I'm going to pull off the steamed tempeh. And so the marinade I made, it's really basic. If anyone's super interested, I'll definitely give you the recipe. But basically, it's a little olive oil, a little Bragg's amino acids with maple syrup, a little maple syrup, and a little balsamic vinegar, smoked paprika, and cumin. And of course, garlic and ginger. Because it really complements. You can't have enough. And another thing is the tempeh, when it has been freshly steamed, it really absorbs the flavors really nice. So you don't need to like marinate it overnight. If you do, the flavors will soak more. But
Those rice noodles,
yeah.
I know they come in that package. How long can they be in your cupboard?
I've never had a problem with the rice noodles. It's the rice papers because they'll break and tear on you, but the noodles, it's like, you know, they're pulling apart anyways. You'd never know if they were old or fresh, I don't think. I've never had an old rice noodle and identified it.
Okay.
I tend to like not really believe in expiration dates. But in this case, because they were tearing apart consistently, despite if I soaked them a long time or despite if I soaked them a short time, they were just falling apart. Cool. All right, we'll let that sit for a minute. All right. In case anyone wants to see this, I'm going to leave the rice papers up there and the rice noodles for people to check out if they want. And so we've got the rice noodles here. I'm going to kind of pull them apart because you can see they get kind of sticky. And I'm gonna, is anyone seeing anything up here that disgusts them that they cannot eat? Okay, what about cilantro? Do I have any cilantro haters in the crowd? Because cilantro can taste like soap to people, it's a genetic thing. So I'll withhold the cilantro, or I'll save the cilantro for last. I'll put your dish aside. Okay, there's two? Is that it? Two, going once, going twice?
Speak now.
Yeah. Has anyone never tried jicama? Jicama's kind of a new one for me, like in the last, I don't know, few years. It's quite crunchy and delicious and lightly sweet, and it looks like a big ball of weirdness. Let me see, I think I have the other half of it. So if you ever see this in the grocery store now, you'll know it's jicama, and it's sweet and delicious. And if you don't get a really good sample of it, let me know and I'll cut you up a piece. Okay. I love vegetables. So I think some people like prefer their ratios of more noodle to vegetable. I like more vegetable to noodle. So. And it's so colorful and pretty. Like, we're not even done yet, and it's so pretty already. So I'm just gonna put all the sauce on. I'm gonna mix a little salt because I typically use a salted peanut butter, but this one's unsalted if I'm not mistaken.
It is.
Okay, so I'm gonna add a little extra salt, just a little bit. some little magic hands here. I'm almost tempted to make one more batch of the sauce to like really sauce it up for you guys. You guys want to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, we're going saucy. Let's see. We're gonna see, this is how Faith really cooks. She just makes it up as she goes. I'm like, oh, that's good. We're gonna finish this jar of peanut butter. A little bit of aminos. Oops. Jars and jars. So I obviously used all my lime, but we're gonna double squeeze a little bit. Gotta improvise. This is what it's like in real life, people.
You are getting a lot more out of that.
But wow. Alright.
Were the lines room temperature when you started?
They were. And a little bit of water. Is anyone paying attention? Did I miss anything?
So you don't peel your ginger, does it have nutrients in the skin?
Yeah, so I am a big advocate of not peeling anything. I don't peel my potatoes, I don't peel my carrots, I don't peel my apples, I don't peel anything because that's where the most nutrients are, is in the skins of the vegetables and the fruits. And that's where a lot of... What's that?
Did you peel the jicama?
I did peel the jicama.
I didn't see any browns on the jicama, so I was just curious.
I peeled the jicama. So I don't know if you've seen... This is really raw. This is straight raw.
It does not taste
Yeah.
good at all.
Do a little more water.
Gabriel will catch you.
So do you only do organic vegetables then if you're keeping skins?
I tend to try to buy most of my vegetables organic in general. I have heard and adhered to at one time or another, have you heard of the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen?
Yeah.
So like, you know, there's like certain vegetables that aren't as problematic if you buy them conventional versus certain ones that you want to get almost exclusively organic because of all the pesticides that are used. But I just keep the skins period because regardless, it's still where a lot of the nutrients live in the plant. So cleaning them better would be a good start if someone's not buying organic, just cleaning the vegetables. Everyone's like, oh, that's a big bowl. Like, I'm like, yeah. Because otherwise this would be all over the counter right now.
Did you use a mandolin to slice everything up, or did you do it by hand, or what?
The carrots I used a food processor shredder, but everything else was by hand. You certainly could mandolin.
Or spiralizer?
Yeah, you could use a spiralizer, but I actually just, me and my helper in the back just cut them all up.
They were amazing.
Very fast hands.
About how many egg rolls would it make with a single batch?
Well, I don't think amounts for vegetables, but you mean per sauce.
Oh, you know,
Because the only thing I
yes,
really
per
put on there was
sauce.
measurement of sauce, and that just depends on how much you like to dip. I really like to dip things, so. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and last chance, 2 without cilantro. Okay. And is there anyone that does not want tempeh? Otherwise, I'll just like throw a slice or two on everyone's plate on top so you can try it. Okay. All right, sweet. Well, while we're working on this, I guess you can kind of come up and talk, and I'll like work on getting people
Getting us a
served.
dish, yeah, or we can, I guess Tony can help the dish, I can help dish too.
Okay.
Um,
Never have enough
Tell us your
television.
dish.
Talking dish too, right? I'm not a great multitasker, but I can try.
Is anyone opposed to? I'm gonna put on a clean pair of gloves and do gloves. I just feel like it's so much quicker.
So, so what do you think? Should I try to do something nutrition-wise now, or do you think it might be? Do you think people want to try their food before we dive deep?
What do you guys want? You want to eat and talk, or you want to eat first? Eat and talk. Okay, cool.
You all are a group.
You guys are multitask.
You're all a sharp group. Plus, Faith knows her nutrition so well that it's like I don't really even need to be here. But don't tell that to anyone because I don't want to be, outsourced or forgotten about. The poor little registered dietitian. Wonderful. Well, I made. I'm sorry. Clear my throat. I made a little handout which most of you all may have picked up out front. If not, we have more copies out there and you can grab one on your way out or share with a partner. These were some of the most powerful principles that I came across, and they were a big inspiration for me to go back to school and basically spend 4.5 years to become a registered dietitian. And it was all based on watching Forks Over Knives, which many of you may have heard of, and then dealing with a lot of chronic digestive problems, and also a real passion for social justice, and wanting to make a good contribution with my life's work. And so I figured, hey, my human rights issue that I really need to tackle is spreading evidence-based nutrition with the world. And I came to find that was really through preaching the benefits of whole food plant-based nutrition. And I came across this registered dietitian named Jeff Novick. He's quoted in my citations there on the front and the back. And he's just a stellar guy. And he came up with this, what's called the healthy eating placemat is what he called it on one side of your figure there. And that's just really, for me, what I think, as opposed to the My Plate that's promoted by the the United States Department of Agriculture, somewhat similar to that, but this is, I just think, the best evidenced way to eat if you want to really prevent, treat, and even reverse a lot of the chronic health problems that we have in the Western world. And so you can see it's basically a 50-50 method, so about half our plate wants to be fruit and or vegetables, and then about half our plate wants to be things that have some more calorie density to them, and those include legumes, which are peas, lentils, and beans, intact whole grains, as well as other starchy vegetables like potatoes, yams, sweet potatoes, winter squashes, things like that. And then starters want to be water-based soups and or salads, high in vegetable content, when and if possible. Drinking water. Water is really the healthiest drink, not cow's milk. And then finishing with fruit as kind of the healthiest way to eat a dessert. And that's not to say you can't ever eat cake or anything. It's just throughout the course of our lives, the more we can kind of imitate this way of eating, we're going to reduce our likelihood of dealing with many of the chronic ailments that we see many of our family members, often ourselves, dealing with throughout the course of our lives. And we're just going to feel our best on a daily basis and perform our best. And when we feel our best and perform our best, I think we really have the most happiness, the most joy, and that's what life's really all about, is kind of maximizing our happiness and joy here in the small amount of time that we have on earth before we pass away. So, and then on the back is what I think another very, very important concept, something that revolutionized my understanding of how to keep myself healthy and how to most effectively manage my body weight so that I wouldn't have to worry about ever becoming overweight and obese, which of course are, some of our key risk factors for things like diabetes, heart disease, stroke, the things that kill more Americans than, any others in the United States. And that's just per pound of food, what any of these different foods will equal in terms of their calories per pound. So on the left we have vegetables at 100 calories per pound, and then on the right we have oils and or animal fats, which are about 4,000 calories per pound. And there's been some wonderfully pioneering research from a PhD named Barbara Rolls out of Penn State University, and she's done a lot of work in this concept of calorie density, which is the title at the top of the chart. And what she showed is that people who naturally eat about 550 calories per pound, that's that arrow that kind of drops from the top, tend to have the healthiest body weights. And that's not to say I've never counted, I've never actually calculated my exact calorie density on a daily basis. This is just a concept to know that if we're overweight or obese and we have weight to lose, we just want to choose more and more foods toward the left-hand side of that graph. And then if we're already at a healthy body weight, or even if we need to gain weight, if we're trying to put on muscle mass, or if we're dealing with being underweight, then we want to eat some of a higher proportion of the foods on the right-hand side of that graph. And so knowing this for people, because of course nutrition is one of the most confusing topics I think that we face, and that's much to do with the fact that the food industry is an industry that wants to make profit. But of course nutrition is so closely linked to our health. What we eat is going to primarily determine what our health outcomes are going to be long term. Of course stress reduction and exercise and having loving relationships and good support networks are also vitally important. But we can't get by in life even if we have those other things, if we're eating a very unhealthy diet. And so following these principles for how to kind of build our plate, and then knowing what foods are going to best support kind of our overall health, and then maintaining a healthy weight, I think will help us all, kind of more easily manage our health and what we eat. And it can really stand to revolutionize health and healthcare in the United States. With those things being said, any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
What does CC mean?
Oh yeah, good question. So that's just an abbreviation that I picked up from Jeff Novick so that it helps everything to fit nicely on the graph. That just stands for complex carbohydrates. So unproc CC is just unprocessed complex carbohydrates. So those are going to be your things that you see on that right-hand side of the plate. Mostly the intact whole grains and the starchy vegetables like winter squash or potatoes. Of course, on that right-hand side, we also have legumes. And then legumes have their own category. They're slightly more dense, so they're about 600 calories per pound of weight, as opposed to those whole grains, as well as those starchy vegetables, which are going to be overall, on average, a little bit lower in calories than beans. But beans are some of the healthiest foods that we can eat. And so I love, some of you may have heard of a wonderful doctor named Joel Fuhrman. He promotes a diet, which of course is a plant-based diet, which he calls the Nutritarian diet. And it's one of the best ways to really eat, because not only does he promote eating plant-based, he promotes eating foods that are very high in nutrient density. So not just low in calorie density, like the veggies and the fruits, which also happen to be the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet, but really concentrating on getting those foods that are super high in vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, antioxidants, things like that that are really going to help keep us healthy. And if we're dealing with some type of illness, they're going to help to treat, and in many cases even reverse, a lot of the ailments that we commonly see in the United States.
Who is that doctor again, and what was
His name is Joel Fuhrman. And the last name is spelled Fuhrman. And what he promotes is, of course, a plant-based Nutritarian diet, but he has 6 food groups that he really, really highly recommends, and that's because they're so powerfully linked to treating disease or keeping us healthy if we're not dealing with disease. And those are called G-bombs. G and then the word bomb, like to drop a bomb. And that stands for greens. We all know that spinach and kale and collard greens and mustard greens and any other dark leafy green that you can think of are some of the healthiest foods on the planet, right? So the more greens we can eat, the better. B stands for beans. You can compare black beans to, say, blueberries, and black beans actually have more antioxidants. We've all heard that blueberries have antioxidants, right? And antioxidants help to basically gobble up those things that are called free radicals, throughout our bodies. And free radicals can create inflammation. They can create DNA damage, which can then lead to cancer. Those mutations can then spiral out of control and lead toward, growth of cancerous tumors and things. And so antioxidants are good. Well, blueberries are great, but a number of types of beans actually have a higher concentration of antioxidants than blueberries do. But you don't hear that in the news. You don't hear that when you're reading some, article online. And so the more beans we can get into our diets, really, the better. They also happen to be so packed full of, protein, which people are always saying, where do you get your protein? You need to get more protein. Of course, protein's really never been an issue. But beans are great. The O stands for onions. Onions are wonderful. The M stands for mushrooms, which of course aren't plants, they're fungi. But they're very, very healthy for us. The second B stands for berries. We know berries are super healthy. So the more berries, the better. BOMBS, and then the S stands for seeds. And so seeds are some of the healthiest foods. We know that flax seeds are linked with bringing down hypertension. They're very good for reducing risk for breast cancer. For people who have already undergone, treatment for breast cancer, they've been shown to very powerfully prevent the reoccurrence of breast cancer. And that's because of compounds in those seeds called lignans, which are super, super healthy, super awesome. So flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, being three of the principal wonderful, kind of nutrient powerhouses. But any kind of seeds, really. Pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, they're all wonderful. And so the more G-bombs we can get in our diets, those acronyms are always good because they're easy to remember. Yeah.
With flax seeds, if you use flax oil, is that kind of the same benefit? Or?
It's similar, but I'm a big proponent of whole food, plant-based nutrition, and so of course whenever we take a whole food like a flaxseed and we press it, or we we put a chemical input or a heat input into that seed or into that olive, whatever it may be, to extract the oils out of it, a lot of times we're not going to end up with as healthy a byproduct as the original food itself. And so there's nothing wrong with eating small amounts of flaxseed oil, but I would always recommend that the best choice would be to eat the whole flaxseed in its ground form. If you eat the whole seed, of course, it's going to pass right through you because we're not able to digest it and break it down. So we just want to make sure that the flaxseed has been ground. Either it's already been ground at the store and we buy ground flaxseed meal, or we can just put it in a coffee grinder or any other kind of grinder at home, grind it up good so that our body can get access to all those wonderful phytochemicals and healthy fats like the omega-3 precursors, things like that. Yes?
So you use the term nutrients, and you've mentioned a few of them.
Mm-hmm.
But I know this could be the answer to this question could be potentially very long, but could you very briefly describe what a nutrient is, or what the nutrients are, and why they're beneficial?
Sure. Well, we have, I guess, to start, two different main classifications for nutrients. We have our macronutrients and our micronutrients. Macronutrients just being 3, perhaps 4 if you include alcohol, right? But those are our
I think we should.
those are our nutrients that provide something that we call energy, which we also call calories, right? Carbohydrate, protein, and fat, and then alcohol. So carbohydrate and protein are about the same when it comes to calories, 4 calories per gram of weight. Fat is more than twice that at 9 calories per gram. That's why, of course, fats end up at the far right-hand side of this graph, whether it's just sheer fat and oil, or whether it's nuts and seeds, which we know nuts and seeds are very healthy, but next to oil and fat, they're the second most calorie-dense food on the planet. So it's just something we want to be mindful of. But they're so packed full of healthy fats, fiber, protein, other kinds of nutrients that are beneficial for our health. So nuts and seeds are wonderful to incorporate into our diets. And then our micronutrients, so those are going to include, and those are the nutrients that don't provide energy, they don't provide calories. And that includes vitamins and minerals. And for much of history, when we started to learn about nutrients, they didn't know about all the other nutrients that we now know as like phytochemicals or phytonutrients and all these other things. They just thought about the vitamins and minerals as being these other essential things that our bodies need that we can't live without. And so that, I think, more or less, I don't know if I have a great definition of a nutrient, but it's something that the body needs to use as fuel to fuel all the vital functions that our bodies perform on a daily basis, whether it's our muscles actually pulling on our skeleton to get us around, or whether it's our brains, thinking their thoughts so that we can, do all the wonderful things we do, so that we can write scientific papers, or so that we can just talk to each other and have relationships. And so they're kind of like the vital things that we need to live and to thrive. And so the vitamins, the minerals, the other phytonutrients are a lot of the other things that we need besides just the energy-based nutrients. Carbs, protein, fat, and I forgot to say alcohol is 7 calories per gram. So it kind of falls in the middle. So a lot of people don't know that. They drink alcohol. It doesn't seem like it has calories in it. But at 7 calories per gram, it's a fairly calorie-dense product. And so something else to be mindful of. I don't know a ton about the biochemistry of alcohol. I know a number of popular plant-based doctors that I follow, like John McDougall. Some of you all may have heard of him. He's featured in Forks Over Knives. He's been, doing wonderful things for the medical industry and for, countless thousands of people for well over 40 years. He claims that the way alcohol is metabolized, you can drink as much alcohol as you want and you're never going to get fat. A good example of that is a lot of alcoholics, right? Like really bad alcoholics. They're often some of the skinniest people you see. If they were absorbing those 7 calories per gram efficiently, you figure they probably wouldn't be so emaciated. And so I think the big deal with alcohol, when it comes to weight, there's a lot of other issues with alcohol. It's a known toxin to every single organ system in our body, right? So that's another good reason. It's the loss of inhibition that you get with drinking that then causes you to veg out on huge amounts of cheesy pretzels and hot dogs and burgers that are then making you fat rather than just people drinking too much. So it may not be so much the beer gut, it's drinking the beer that then leads you to eating all of the junk food that then leads to your beer gut. But I can't, quote a very powerful base of scientific literature that actually proves that. But I hope that's a pretty good definition for what a nutrient is and why they're important. Other questions? Yes.
Gabriel, on one of your handouts here, you compare an egg with 5 cigarettes. And what's the current feeling on the nutrient versus LDL of eggs and egg yolk?
That's a great question. Eggs are one of those things. That's actually not my handout, that's Tony's. I don't work for APNM. But that's been a controversial topic that came out, I think Tony probably saw that in What the Health, where they make that comparison, and maybe you pulled it off of something else.
Dr. McGregor.
Oh, Dr. Greger also says that?
15 million causes of that.
Oh, perfect. There you go. But it's based on a study, at least to my knowledge, it's based on a study out of a researcher that is based at a university in Canada. And I think this study was also quoted in a popular documentary called What the Health. And some people really tried to pick it apart. And of course, with studies like that, there are association studies, right? So the data, as far as I know, and the study that made that connection or that correlation between relating, what the health implications of eating one egg and how that compares to something that we know is deleterious to our health, like smoking cigarettes.
But that's the whole egg, right? It's not like just egg whites.
I assume that's definitely the whole egg. Yeah. So nonetheless, it's an association study. So they're using statistics to then look at health outcomes, to compare dietary intake data that they get from people doing food recall, where they write everything they eat down, on a number of days of the week, or they do food frequency questionnaires, where a researcher will have a person fill out a food frequency. There's a number of different ways that we can collect dietary information, right? And there's pluses and minuses to each one of those. So some people will pick apart data like that and say people are naturally unreliable when it comes to recalling what they've eaten. And that is certainly a limitation. But when we look at these big studies where you have like hundreds or even thousands of people that you're looking at, I think some of those errors tend to get kind of averaged out. But nonetheless, the statistics that were used in that study were good. you know? But it wasn't, but a study like that wasn't an interventional study. And so to actually prove causation, you know, that like eating one egg causes the same amount of risk that smoking 5 cigarettes would be, we have to do this long-term study where we follow people over years. We actually put them in different groups. There's usually a control group that doesn't get an intervention. Then there's different intervention groups that get interventions. Then we can follow them for 6 months or 5 years or 10 years, whatever it happens to be. For a lot of these health outcomes, you'd have to follow people for so long, it makes doing some of these studies difficult, right? Because it's hard to follow people for 5 years or 10 years and then collect, data on them in that amount of time. It's time consuming and it's incredibly costly. So there's no causation that's proved in a study like that. But the statistics that were used were good. And I certainly agree with doctors like Michael Greger or, I don't know if the researcher in that who actually did that study made recommendations in terms of what they recommend people eat. Probably not. They're just putting out research. I think it's a good idea in general for people to minimize their egg consumption. If they're not in love with eggs, I'd say you certainly don't need them and they're not good for your health. If you're in love with eggs, I say try to eat fewer of them if possible. And I'd say pair them with foods that we know are very high in fiber and very high in a whole slew of different nutrients that we know to be protective for health, right? So if you're eating an egg and you're pairing it with dark leafy greens, you're pairing it with mushrooms, you're pairing it with onions, foods that we know are protective of our health, you're going to minimize any damage that egg may be doing to you when it comes to, the biggest things that eggs are associated with, of course, is, greater risk for heart disease and greater risk for stroke. Yes?
I'd like to ask if you know a good egg replacer. I went
Yes, I just came across one.
Yeah,
There's a new company with a brilliant and wonderful young woman who started a company named Sparrow. That's S-P-E-R-O. I think that's like a Greek word for hope, maybe Latin, something like that. And I don't know if we have them yet at Whole Foods or Sprouts or Natural Grocers or some of the other, natural and kind of health food stores in New Mexico. But eventually we will. I'm sure it'll roll out nationally in some of the popular chains, hopefully sooner than later. But she's got a great product called Scramble-It, which is just Scram, B-L-I-T, for like scrambled eggs, Scramble-It. That makes, it's different than a whole egg, of course. It's pretty hard to imitate a raw, yolk and egg white like a chicken makes. But it's a scrambled product, and it's one I can actually say, I don't like a lot of the meat alternatives and dairy replacements and things like that because they're so highly processed. I think they're good options for people who are trying to minimize their consumption of meats and eggs and cow's milk and other dairy products. But I think we always want to push people toward whole plant foods. It's kind of always the end goal.
I spent a week, 10 days at McGregor and Jeff Novitz, the nutritionist, and he was talking about this being the year of the vegan, and he compared those Beyond Burgers to a McDonald's, and with so much fat in it, he said the McDonald's is healthier for you.
Oh yeah, well I mean, yeah, was that Jeff Novick or was that Dr. McDougall?
That was Jeff.
That was Jeff. That's interesting. Yeah, because anything, I can guarantee you, Jeff knows his research. I'm surprised that he said a regular McDonald's hamburger would be healthier than what brand was it?
I think
Beyond Burger.
Beyond Burger.
Beyond Burger. That's interesting. The Beyond Burger, as far as I know, has less, I'm positive it has less sodium than like a McDonald's hamburger. It has half the saturated fat. I know this because I just listened to a podcast last night. Not that you can always trust podcasts, but one of the chief guys who works for Beyond Burger was on a podcast last night that I was listening to, and he happened to say we have half the saturated fat than a standard hamburger. So I'm surprised that he would say that it was less healthy.
It might have been the What's the other one?
Impossible.
I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's what he was talking about, the impossible.
And this isn't just based on my bias, because I'm a vegan, I'm 100% plant-based. So of course I do have a bias, but my chief bias is that I was incredibly critical, and I scrutinized all the information before I became convinced that being a vegan was really the healthiest way to go. And that was the reason I became a vegan. I said I want to do the absolute healthiest thing for the human body, for my human body. And so for me, and I'm equally as passionate about the animal rights and also the environmental implications behind what we eat. But what first brought me to veganism was science-based, evidence-based information that told me that this was the healthiest thing I could do for my body. So I certainly, but that being said, based on what I've seen of those burgers, I think they're better options than eating a McDonald's hamburger. Hands down. There's no doubt about it. They're not nearly as healthy as eating the G-bombs, right? Eating whole greens and beans and onions and mushrooms and berries and seeds and the whole other slew of fruits and vegetables and whole plant-based foods. But I think it's definitely a better option if somebody's looking to minimize their meat consumption and start to maximize or build upon, increasing the number of plant-based foods that they incorporate into their diet on a daily basis. In the back.
So plants usually don't have a complete protein. Is there a list or a reference where that has a cross, rice and beans?
Sure, for things you need to complement. So that all came from that popular book. I can't remember if it was and the author has since recanted or said, that was never my intention for what I said to become what it did. And that myth has now been dispelled by registered dietitians like myself and PhD, biochemistry, nutrition researchers. We don't need to worry about complementing proteins. I can eat, if I ate carrots, all day today, and I ate 2,900 calories worth of carrots or whatever I need on a daily basis. And you look at the 9 essential amino acids, protein is made up of amino acids, right? Those are the Legos or the building blocks that then create these longer chains, which then, fold and create these, complex proteins that, do a wide variety of, satisfy a wide variety of functions in our bodies, right? They're essential. And so our body manufactures or needs a total of 20 amino acids, but 9 of those are considered essential. Essential just means we have to eat them. Our bodies can't make them. The other 11 our bodies can make. And of those 9, even though, yes, rice, like grains, are certainly lower in 1 or 2 of the amino acids, right? And beans are a little bit lower, but they're lower in different ones. And so that's why there was originally that myth that we need to combine rice and beans to then account for the 1 or 2 that might be a little lower in each of those different categories. That'll kind of make up the difference, right? But if I eat if I'm on a 2,000 calorie diet and eat 2,000 calories of brown rice, even though rice is a little bit lower than, say, the high quality proteins or the complete proteins of beef and chicken and fish and eggs and, the byproducts that come from cows. If I eat 2,000 calories, for most of those amino acids, say this is the minimum threshold right here on a bar graph, right? We're just looking at a simple bar graph. For most of those amino acids, I'm going to be way above what I need if I'm looking at individual bars. Each bar is going to be a little different, right? But even in the amino acids that are considered the limiting amino acids that are lower in brown rice, if I'm eating 2,000 calories, it's not going to be way up here like 7 or 8 of those other amino acids, but it's still going to cross the threshold, right? And so the people that originally purported that, they didn't fully understand nutrition and nutritional biochemistry and what the body needs. And they really hadn't fully done their homework, so to speak. Or we've just added learning since then, and we now have a more complete picture. And so that's not to say I'm not recommending anybody eats 2,000 calories of carrots or 2,000 calories of brown rice, because because we all desire to have more variety in our diets. It's going to be hard probably to eat brown rice for the rest of your life. And you're going to maybe be missing out on other nutrients that are important. And so anybody on a normally varied diet, of course, throughout human history, any kind of real scientific data we have, there's absolutely been no cases of protein deficiency that have ever existed, right? The only cases that are even questionable at that are cases where people are dealing with eating, like one food that's not even, really even a whole plant-based food. It would just be some processed thing. But it's people mostly who are just dealing with extreme starvation. The cases of protein deficiency are going to be in countries where people are literally starving to death. And that would be the only case where you really need to worry about it. Some people aren't getting enough protein. If you look at studies, studies will show that like 97% of Americans are basically getting twice what we need in a day, our basic needs, twice the protein that we need to do perfectly fine, right? And that's 97% of Americans are getting, they're not even just meeting the minimum, they're getting twice what we need in a day, right? So there's only 3% that aren't that high. But if you look at another statistic, a full 97% of Americans aren't even meeting the minimum daily requirements for fiber. And that's just abysmal, that's pathetic, that's so sad, it breaks my heart, it's ridiculous. That 97% of us in the United States can't even meet the minimum requirement. The minimum requirements are ridiculous, they're low. We should be eating much more fiber than that. And that's about 26 grams of fiber per day for women, and then 35 grams of fiber per day for men. It's only a little bit higher in men because on average, our calorie requirements tend to be a little higher. We're just eating more food on average on a daily basis, right? But women should be at least at 26, men should be at least at 35. So what we really need to be worried about is eating more fiber, and of course, what foods do we find fiber in? Whole plant foods, right? We don't find it in beef and chicken and fish and eggs, and we don't find it in cow's yogurt. Well, some companies have started putting in fiber to things like cow's yogurt and things like that to make them better selling points. But bottom line, we don't get any fiber in animal products, we only get it in whole plant foods. And we don't get any fiber in processed junk plant foods either, like eating, Cheetos and, white rice and things like that. That's not to say a little bit of white rice isn't fine. The Asians have existed on that for as long as we can remember, and they didn't have any obesity or diabetes eating white rice because they were eating a lot of other fruits and vegetables, legumes like soy and other beans, and nuts and seeds, stuff like that. Other questions? Yes?
Two quick questions. One, thoughts about drinking, let's say, water with a meal versus not drinking water with a meal.
Great question.
And the other one is, do you pay attention? I read once years ago that the rice that's grown in the southern part of the United States has a lot of arsenic or something.
It does.
And do you pay attention to that at all? So those are two questions.
I certainly pay attention. So I'll take the first one first. There's nothing wrong with drinking water at a meal. I generally, because when you're eating a diet that's naturally dilute in calories, right? This diet is based on the foods that are concentrated on the left-hand side of this graph, right? They're low in calories or calorie dilute. And so when you're eating a diet and of course, that's also the healthiest diet. That's not to say that you can't eat some foods on the right-hand side of the graph. But our diet wants to primarily consist of the foods. The bulk of our diet should be the foods on the left-hand side of the graph. Number one, these foods are all really high in water content. Fruits and vegetables are often 90% or even more, water content by weight. So you're getting a lot of hydration from these foods. Cooked whole grains and beans can be as much as 70% water by weight. It's getting a lot of water in these foods. But if you're thirsty at the meal, there's nothing wrong with drinking. Some people have put out, Tom Brady, we all know him, right? Popular quarterback. He's a plant-based athlete, and I think it has much to do with his success. He's been, a top quarterback for a very long time in the NFL, which is very rare, and, in something like the NFL, which is so hard on your body. But he's a big proponent of never drinking during the meal and waiting like 1 or 2 hours after you eat before you can drink. As far as I know, there isn't any real solid evidence-based information that says that you shouldn't drink with a meal. But yes, it naturally makes sense. Hydrate between meals because that's when you're not eating. So you want to just drink throughout the day so that you stay hydrated. And then for me, I don't usually feel very thirsty when I'm eating. And so then just enjoy your food during the meal. but have some sips of a drink if you need to wet your palate or if you're feeling thirsty. Nothing wrong with that. Second question was? Arsenic, yes. So yes, because of all of the arsenic that we dump throughout the South, throughout the times that we were raising a lot of cotton in the South, throughout this, the times of slavery and things like that, they used arsenic to kill all the boll weevils and, as a pesticide. And of course, arsenic's very persistent, so it's something that's going to hang around for a very long time. And the way rice is grown, rice happens to take a lot of that arsenic from the soil and it takes it up into the plant. And so it's great to then buy rice that's not grown, in the southern or southeastern part of the United States when possible. There's other things you can do to minimize arsenic content, and that is you can cook rice like pasta. So you can take, several quarts of water in a big stock pot. You can then cook your 1 or 2 or 3 cups of rice in there, and some of that arsenic then is going to leach out into the water. You then use your colander, you rinse off your rice, and that's not going to get rid of all of it, but it's definitely going to get rid of more of it than just cooking your normal 2 parts water to 1 part rice, and then you're basically just absorbing all that water. Nothing's getting rinsed off. That's not something I do. I just put rice in an Instant Pot or in a rice cooker, and I just cook it. So I don't treat pasta like rice, and I'm not trying to leach out any of the bad chemicals and get rid of them. But if that's something that's of high concern, that's something proactive that you can do to minimize arsenic content even further. And then just choosing to buy from good locations, choosing to buy organic. Now, of course, organic's not going to completely prevent arsenic that's persistent, that's already in the soil. But I know Lundberg Farms, they're a family out of California that's been doing rice for many, many years. They're proactively, at least I've read on their website and articles they've written, that they proactively do as much as they can to try to, minimize water usage and minimize the amount of arsenic that's, getting into the rice. It's not going to completely get rid of it, but they're doing their best to minimize the problem. Another question? Yes.
So if you're starting to think about putting more vegetables in your diet, and I'm not saying I am, but if I did,
Sure.
what would be the first cookbook? I don't want 100 cookbooks. I don't want a really hard cookbook, but something that someone really busy could say, okay, I can start with this particular set of recipes.
That's a great question. And if anybody, sometimes people complain about beans with the gas, or they'll complain about plant-based diets in general, because when you're eating more calorie dilute, you have to eat more, right? And that's the biggest complaint when people go plant-based. Most people feel better and better, but there's a small percentage, because it's the healthiest way to eat, but a small percentage of people will say, I have no energy, I have no vitality. When I eat meat, I feel really good. The amount of food on your plate that you've always put on your plate, you're going to be getting a lot less calories than you did before. Even if it looks like the same amount of food, when you cut out the animal products, the junk food, the processed food, especially the huge amounts of added oil and added fat that many Americans have in their diets, when you minimize those things, you have to really increase the volume of food that you're eating. Okay? And then, of course, make sure to add some of these other foods in too as well, so you make sure you're feeling satisfied when you eat, and you're not just feeling famished all the time. So the biggest thing is just most people, if they ever don't feel great on a plant-based diet, it's because they're not eating enough, so eat more. If that's a problem, because your digestive tract isn't used to moving all that fiber through, that's a lot of work, right? Even though fiber is wonderful for our digestion, it's wonderful for our gut health, which is our microbiome, right? The bacteria that live in our gut. Only increase 5 grams per week fiber, right? So don't go from 0 to hero. Don't go from eating 10 grams of fiber per week to go eat 50 grams of fiber per week, even though 50 grams of fiber is great. Add it slowly but surely. Some people can deal with fast, bigger changes better than others, but adding about 5 grams of fiber per week is a good general rule of thumb, so you don't just overwhelm your digestive tract and deal with a lot of bloating, constipation, diarrhea, and a ton of gas, right? And with the gas will get better over time, with beans, with whatever. That's not to say you're going to completely eliminate your gas, But for people that feel like they're having a ton of gas when they're eating more whole plant-based foods, just incorporate, go slowly, like I say, and then eat them regularly, and your body will adjust, and you'll have less gas over time, certainly less bloating and things like that. And so, cookbook, that's a hard question. There's so many good cookbooks. Like I say, Jeff Novick, whose name is on the front and the back of this page, he's got a great Facebook page, and he's got all these recipes that he calls fast food, but it's all whole food plant-based, and so they're incredibly easy. He uses a lot of frozen vegetables, things that are already ready to go. You can even use brown rice, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, they sell frozen brown rice. All you do is steam it in a pot or steam it in the microwave. It's great. So today more than ever, we never have excuses for not eating really healthy food. There are good excuses, don't get me wrong. And because we're dealing with a lot in life, right? We're busy with work, we have a lot of other life stressors, and so cooking from scratch is a big hurdle for a lot of people, and it's a learning curve. But that being said, Jeff Novick's got a great quote, and that is, variety is the spice of life, but simplicity is the key to success. So keep it simple, right? We're not all going to be able to cook these gourmet meals every night. That may taste great, and it can be wonderfully, whole food, plant-based, and healthy, but it's not going to be realistic for most of us long term. And the key to any health change is, if it's going to be healthy for you, you can't just do it once a week, or you can't just do it every once in a while. It's the daily practice, right? We don't get good at shooting free throws if we just, walk into a basketball court and do it once. Great free throw shooters are made by spending 10,000 hours over many years shooting free throws on a daily basis, right? And it's the same thing with food. If you want to get good at eating healthy, you have to practice it. And so Michael Greger just came out with a great cookbook called How Not to Die, the How Not to Die cookbook. I think it's wonderful. He has a book, a popular book called How Not to Die, and it's how to use nutrition to prevent, treat, and reverse all of our chronic ailments that we see, in Western countries. But he just came out with a cookbook, which is wonderful. Faith and Tony can probably give you all their great recommendations for, to buy. It's hard to say one.
If I had one, I actually do have one, because every recipe I've used in this book I've liked, and I feel like that's the litmus test, how many you actually like versus not. And all her recipes are like one page, which is also important to me. I don't like multiple pages. One Dish Vegan, Robin, I can't think of her last name. Her name's Robin something. It's One Dish Vegan. It's a great cookbook. You can get it for like $10 online, and I've loved all the recipes from it.
It's one
dish
vegan.
Okay.
There we go. So yeah, the more, and there's great, Instant Pot. The more you can utilize. So I do, I love nutrition to the point of almost obsession, right? I decided to go back to school, get another degree, go through a dietetic internship to become a registered dietitian. And even me, it's like, I don't like spending a lot of time in the kitchen. I want it to be as simple, as easy, as quick as possible. And so even though preparing fresh ingredients like this is beautiful and delicious, a lot of times on a daily basis when I'm busy, I just take out, some frozen kale out of the freezer, some frozen bell peppers because they're already washed, chopped, prepped, ready to go. And I'll just throw those into a pot with a can of beans, some salt-free spice mix that's just already ready to go, curry, Mexican, Cajun, it could be anything. And then add that to a sweet potato, a whole grain, or a sweet potato, whole grain brown rice, something like that. And I have a wonderfully healthy meal that you can literally put together in 5, 10, 15 minutes at the most, right? And so there's small changes or sacrifices that you make when you use, frozen vegetables, because when the water expands, when it crystallizes as ice, it'll break down those cell walls in the vegetables. Then when you thaw it, things, because those cell walls have kind of been ruptured, the textures tend to be different, right? The textures aren't quite as crisp, or not nearly as crisp in most cases as in fresh vegetables. But it's really, for me, not that big of a sacrifice to make. Now, that's not to say I don't use fresh veg. It's just when I'm really busy and I come home late and I don't have a lot of time, I'm just going to, utilize a big pot of brown rice that I made ahead of time during the weekend. Or some baked sweet potatoes or something. I'm going to pop open a can of no salt added beans, and then I'm just going to grab a couple of frozen veggies from the freezer and throw those in the microwave, or just throw those in a pot and heat them up, and you can have a meal in just a very few minutes. So go for it. Are we at the end of our time?
Oh, I was gonna say maybe one more question, and then we'll wrap it up if anyone else has like a...
Awesome. So who has the ultimate question to end us with? So you didn't get a chance to ask one. And you may not have either. But let me ask hers, and then we can rapid fire a couple questions really quick.
Dessert?
Oh, dessert's a great question, right? Well, so fruit's gonna be the best dessert, right? It's easy, it's already ready to go. It's nature's candy. I eat a lot of fresh fruit and especially dried fruit. Dried fruit's gonna be a lot higher in calories, right? So this is only fresh fruit at 300 calories per pound. Dried fruit I don't have on here, but it ends up closer to the right-hand side of the graph. I can't remember if it's in like the 2,300 calorie range. Still very healthy. It's fruit. But because we've taken all the water out of it, we've concentrated it. So we just want to be mindful of the amount we're eating. But again, if I'm an athlete who's burning a ton of calories, I don't really need to worry about eating a ton of dried fruit. But if I'm watching my weight, something I'd be mindful of. But dried fruit and fresh fruit are wonderful. You can take, frozen mangoes. You can take, ripe bananas that you throw in the freezer. You can put them through the Yonanas machine, which is just a cool thing that you can just like push, frozen fruit through, and it'll make a soft serve for you out of whole fruits, which is just awesome. And then you can sprinkle on, coconut shreds and, nuts and seeds and stuff like that, and a little bit of cinnamon or whatever, any kind of spice you like, a little ginger spice. Make a wonderfully healthy dessert that way.
What machine was that?
It's called Yonanas. But you can also use a blender, you can also use a food processor. I don't have a Yonana machine, I've seen them use, and I think they're really cool. It's just the easiest way to make a soft serve because you can just kind of push things through the machine.
You guys want a dessert demo? We could do a
Dessert demo would be really cool, right? So yeah, perfect idea.
We could do banana ice cream
Yeah.
and chocolate sauce.
And then, of course, you can have any other kind of dessert too. It's just those are going to be the healthiest ones. And usually the easiest, right? It's easy to just grab a fresh fruit or some dried fruit. Dark chocolate's great because chocolate's super high in antioxidants. Of course, it's got the sugar in there, so you'd be mindful of the amount. But I eat dark chocolate on a pretty regular basis because I love chocolate. And chocolate does definitely have some health benefits. Being mindful of the portion sizes.
Is all dark chocolate vegan?
No.
No.
So you're going to have to read the package, and you're going to have to make sure it doesn't have milk fat, milk, milk solids. There's a million different ways that they might throw milk in there. Just make sure it literally just says like cocoa, cacao, sugar. Those are really the only two ingredients. Sometimes like vanilla, stuff like that.
Trader Joe's is my go-to for vegan chocolate chips, or Costco. They have a big giant bag that's... Not that anyone should be buying. Did you have a quick dose, child? Gabriel, I said
Do you
that.
supplement B12?
Yes, anybody on a plant-based diet should supplement B12. You can eat nutritional yeast, which is usually always fortified with B12. You can eat other fortified foods that have B12 in them. And as long as you're being mindful to get your blood checked on a yearly basis and making sure that they're checking for B12 and that there's other lab values which may get thrown out of whack that can be a result of B12, even if they're not measuring B12 directly, like homocysteine. It's a marker for inflammation in the body. But as long as all your labs are perfectly normal, then fortified foods can be fine. But they're dirt cheap to just get a good quality, B12 supplement. I just recommend 2,500 micrograms per week. So some people are getting way more than that. You don't need any more than 2,500 per week. And that means taking like 1,000, if you have 1,000 microgram pill, take that like every other day. Or sometimes they come in 2,500 micrograms, you can literally just take that once a week. Or sometimes they're in a spray, you can do those once a day or once every other day. But B12 is definitely essential. And then sometimes it's a great idea to take vitamin D3, as well as I think more research is coming out that it's a good idea to have the omega-3s. Of course, you can get them algae-based, but DHA and EPA. Not everybody necessarily needs those, but I think it's a good idea to maybe consider taking those, and that helps our cardiovascular and our neural or our brain health, the EPA and the DHA.
But also that would be for anybody, not just someone who's on a vegan.
Exactly, yeah, that's not veganly exclusive. Those are just happen to be 3 nutrients. B12 is the only one that for sure vegans need to take, and on top of like what omnivores may need to take. And many omnivores are deficient in vitamin B12 too. So if anybody tells you, oh, your vegan diet isn't sufficient because you're not, because you need B12, bottom line, a lot of omnivores are deficient in it too, and they need to supplement it too. So, thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Did you want to say anything before we're done?
No, thank you guys all
Yeah.
so much.